Once upon a time, 75 million years ago, there was an alien galactic ruler named Xenu. Xenu was in charge of all the planets in this part of the galaxy, including our own planet Earth. Except in those days, it was called Tegeac. Now, Xenu had a problem. All of the 76 planets he controlled were overpopulated. Each planet had an average 178 billion people. He wanted to get rid of all the overpopulation, so he had a plan. Xenu took over complete control with the help of renegades to defeat the good people and the loyal officers. Then, with the help of psychiatrists, he called in billions of people for income tax inspections, where they were instead given injections of alcohol and glycol mixed to paralyze them. Then they were put into space planes that looked exactly like DC-8s, except they had rocket motors instead of propellers. These DC-8s, space planes, then flew to planet Earth, where the paralyzed people were stacked around the bases of volcanoes in their hundreds of billions. When they had finished stacking them around, then H-bombs were lowered into the volcanoes. Xenu then detonated all the H-bombs at the same time, and everyone was killed. The story doesn't end there, though. Since everyone has a soul called a Thetan in this story, then they had to trick the souls into not coming back again. So while the hundreds of billions of souls were being blown around by the nuclear winds, he had special electronic traps. This is Xenu. He had special electronic traps that caught all the souls in the electronic beams. These electronic beams were like sticky flypaper. After he had captured all these souls, he had them packed into boxes and taken to a few huge, these had to have been fairly big, huge cinemas. There, all the souls had to spend days watching special 3D motion pictures that told them what life should be like and many confusing things. In this film, they were shown false pictures and told they were God, the devil, and Christ. In this story, this process is called implanting. When the films ended and the souls left the cinema, these souls started to stick together because since they had all seen the same film, they thought they were the same people. They clustered in groups of a few thousand. Now, because there were only a few living bodies left, they stayed as clusters and inhabited these bodies. As for Xenu, the loyal officers finally overthrew him, and they locked him away in a mountain on one of the planets. Actually, I've heard that it is, in fact, this planet, but moving on. He's kept in by a force field powered by an eternal battery, and Xenu is still alive today. It is started by a man, L. Ron Hubbard. He's a science fiction author. He's written profusely on the subject of science fiction. In fact, he was a science fiction, pulp fiction writer for many years of his life. We'll get into L. Ron Hubbard shortly, but yes, I did make a claim that this is a cult. It most certainly is. This is kind of the foundational story. You have this situation taking place long ago and far away, 75 million years ago. There's this alien galactic empire ruled by this evil tyrant named Xenu. And Xenu had this problem. He had 76 planets that were overpopulated. Each one of these planets had an average of 178 billion people. And so Xenu, taking control, he gets the help of psychiatrists, and he calls all these people in. See, there I go. I was chuckling. Sorry. Calls all these people in for income tax inspections. It almost sounds like something you find in the Bible. Anyway, and he paralyzes them. He gives them injections of alcohol and glycol, which ends up causing them to be paralyzed. He loads them onto these DC-8 looking space planes and flies them to Tegeac, Earth. And he stacks them by the billions around these volcanoes, okay, and then lowers H-bombs into the volcanoes and detonates these H-bombs. The H-bombs go off, all these people get blown up, but they're thetans. I know it sounds a whole lot like Satan's. These thetans, which in Scientology is pretty much synonymous with a soul, if you will, okay? They're all flying around, wondering what in the world is going on, right? And so Xenu uses these electronic beams that are sticky like flypaper. And as these souls are blowing around in the wind, they kind of bzz, and they get stuck in the flypaper. And Xenu is able then to gather up these thetans. He then herds them into these giant theaters and brainwashes all of these thetans, these souls, with a new way of thinking. and in the process, they end up hearing, okay, quote unquote, lies about God, the devil, and Jesus Christ. That's interesting. So they're implanted. This process is called implanting. They're implanted with all of these false memories. Okay? And then these thetans are then set loose. They clump together and then they start attaching to bodies. It almost sounds like something you would see in hyper-charismatic circles where they believe that demons are constantly attaching to people. But yes, this movement, Scientology, certainly does match signs of a cult. They do have one single human leader who kind of calls the shots, the dogma, the theology, if you will, even though it's not really theology, but their belief system, their rules. This cult is very abusive to its members. There is, and we'll talk about all this stuff. There is mind control over its members. If the members, people who join this cult and get heavily influenced, okay, if you're just kind of a surface kind of dabbler, checking it out, you don't see this kind of stuff. But if you get involved heavily with this movement, you will be isolated from the rest of the world, from your friends, from your family. Those ties are severed. If you question this movement, if you question the dogma, the beliefs of Scientology, those questions will be discouraged, suppressed, and you might even be labeled a suppressive person. We'll talk about that a little bit later too. That is a bad thing if you're labeled a suppressive person. Some people will be removed from this cult. Those who are removed are demonized. And those who leave the cult are demonized. And so if you're a member of this cult and somebody leaves a cult, you are not to associate with this defector, this heretic, if you will, this suppressive person. So, right. It is a strange movement. You might know of Scientology because of some of its celebrity members. And Scientology is known for roping in celebrities. And so people like Kirstie Alley, Tom Cruise, the Mission Impossible guy, or the Top Gun guy if you're old like me. John Travolta, also Scientology. And there's so many more. They are known for attracting celebrities and then using them to bring in other people. Okay. Also, Scientology is known for its aggressive litigation. And man, it is so true. When you look at their history, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in detail later, but they are known for, if you speak ill of their movement, if you try to expose them, at least in the past, they've been known to sue people. And they will sue them silly. They will sue them out of house and home. They will do everything, anything and everything to take down their opposition. Another tactic of Scientology is to go after people's websites. And I think we'll mention that a little bit more later too. Scientology, oddly enough, they're the only group who has successfully gone after the IRS and really caused the IRS a lot of grief. One of their tactics is just to steamroll. Scientology will do this against people that oppose them. They will bring all kinds of false accusations against them, and they will just steamroll them with so many false accusations, litigation, so much that the person who is opposing Scientology will throw up their hands and basically give up. They can't handle it all. And they give up. They get tired and they decide not to attack the group. Things such as South Park. But South Park is actually one of the first groups, if you will, that show who brought opposition to Scientology, was critical of their claims and their beliefs. And at the end of the show, apparently they said, and they basically at the end of the show said, sue me, challenging Scientology. Scientology didn't do anything. And that's when it was like the cork was popped out of the bottle and articles started coming out left and right that were critical of Scientology's worldview and all of the craziness, the scandals and the things that have been going on. It probably is also the most scandalous group out there as well, as you will see as we move on. But anyway, Scientology boasts of about 8 million people in membership worldwide, at least they did as of 2005. I'm not really sure where their numbers are now, but there are many people who argue that this is not a factual figure, and that's actually including people who simply just took the introductory course to Scientology, or people that came in off the street to do one of their character tests. We'll talk about that quite a bit as we go here, but they will get out on the streets, and their form of evangelism, they'll try to rope you in to come into their clinics and sit down and be asked many questions. The movement was started by L. Ron Hubbard, born in March 13th, 1911. And like I mentioned earlier, he was a very popular pulp fiction author in the 30s and 40s. But things seemed to take a turn during a science fiction convention in New Jersey, somewhere around 1949. L. Ron Hubbard said this. In front of an audience, he announced, "Writing for a penny a word is ridiculous. If a man really wanted to make $1 million, the best way would be to start his own religion." 1 year later, L. Ron Hubbard released Dianetics, which is basically seen as the Bible for Scientology. It's their book, their scriptures. And it is Dianetics, the full title, Dianetics, A Modern Science of Modern Health. Just a few years after that, the first Church of Scientology was opened in California. That was February 18th of 1954. Now, going back to this Dianetics, it was originally intended to be a new psychotherapy, and it was not expected to become the foundation for a new religion. Hubbard defined this Dianetics as a spiritual healing technology and an organized science of thought. Now, he did submit papers outlining these principles in this book, Dianetics, to the Journal of American Medical Association and the American Journal of Psychiatry in 1949. All of it was rejected. Every time his methods of helping people out have been reviewed by various psychiatry associations, medical communities, and the like, they have all been completely outright rejected and denounced as anything scientific. Now, just because they denied it and rejected it, I guess is not necessarily a good argument for denying L. Ron Hubbard's techniques. But when you get to know the writings of L. Ron Hubbard and those who actually knew him, you find that most of everything he said of himself is pure fantasy. L. Ron Hubbard was a pathological liar. So much has been written about this man from people who lived around him, who knew him personally, who walked with him day to day, and have written about him and said, for a long time I thought this guy was for real, and the more time I spent with him, the more I realized he was, perhaps a little bit brilliant, very articulate, but completely mad, and a pathological liar. L. Ron Hubbard at times has claimed or called himself a nuclear physicist. Thing is, he's not a nuclear physicist. In fact, he failed his only class on molecular and atomic physics. L. Ron Hubbard also, while married to his wife Margaret Grubb Hubbard, pretended to be a bachelor to a Sarah Northrup and ended up marrying her. She claimed sleep deprivations, beatings, strangulations, kidnapping of her child and fleeing to Cuba, and Ron counseling her to commit suicide. Okay, so let's actually get into some of the beliefs here. The mind. As far as the mind goes, the mind is divided into 3 divisions, okay? According to Scientology, there's 3 divisions of the mind. There is the analytical mind, and this mind is the part of the mind that works like a perfect computer. It never makes mistakes. It is the I of a person. It is the part of the mind where rational decisions are made, the rational mechanism, which is responsible for consciousness. Okay. It is the good part of the mind. It is the part of the mind that does everything, that is rational, which is thinking, which is, calculating. Okay. It's the part of the mind that we want to all develop, right? Then moving on, there is this second part. This is the reactive mind. It works on a stimulus response basis. Some liken the reactive mind to the subconscious. Okay. The reactive mind is thought to absorb all pain and emotional trauma. And then the reactive mind holds these mental pictures, images of this trauma or these past experiences. Scientology calls these mental pictures, these images of past experiences, Scientology calls them engrams. That is going to be a term that's going to be used a lot as we go on here. These engrams are apparently the single source of aberrations and psychosomatic ills. Okay, the third part, the somatic mind. It's directed by the reactive and analytical minds. The somatic mind controls the body on a physical level. The somatic mind keeps the body regulated and functioning. In other words, it keeps your body ticking. All right, so how does this all work together? Why is this even important? Why is this even worth mentioning in this study? Well, this forms the foundation of why Scientology does what it does. So there's this battle that seems to somewhat take place in your mind. It occurs when the reactive mind interferes with the analytical mind. Okay, you want the analytical mind to be at the wheel, controlling you, right? The reactive mind can cause what some Scientologists call a moment of unconsciousness. A person can be fully awake and functioning during these moments of unconsciousness, but when this happens, the reactive mind will take a mental snapshot of everything that is happening and will store it. These snapshots, again, are called engrams. These engrams will then influence you to react in certain ways to certain stimulus. Hubbard says it this way. Suppose, as an example of an engram and its effects on the spirit, Mr. A has a tonsillectomy. During the operation, the surgeon, who wears glasses, comments angrily to a clumsy nurse, "You don't know what you're doing." Mr. A recovers. A few months later, Mr. A, a bit tired during a hard day at the office, has an argument with his employer, who happens to also wear glasses, who says, "You don't know what you're doing." Mr. A suddenly feels dizzy, stupid, and gets a pain in his throat. There is installed a disc of conditioned semantic response, which affects the thetan. All right, and so there you see L. Ron Hubbard basically saying, okay, so you have this traumatic event happen to you, or doesn't necessarily have to be a traumatic event. You have some event that happens to you. Your reactive mind takes a snapshot of this event and certain things that happen during this event, okay? And then later on in life, something very similar happens, almost like a deja vu moment, but things are a little bit different. Now your reactive mind takes control or it interferes with the analytical mind, and what would have been more of a calculated, analytical, rational response from you can get muddied from these engrams, from these snapshots that somehow got stuck inside of your, the hard drive of your brain, okay? And it's messing up how you should normally react to certain stimuli. The solution here is to somehow get rid of these engrams, these reactive mind snapshots of other events that are influencing your analytical thinking, your ability to make good analytical decisions. Okay, so, and we're going to get into in just a minute here how they do this, but the state of man, let's talk about that really quick. Mankind is an immortal being called a Thetan. Again, not a Satan. This is a Thetan. These Thetans are not originally from Earth. Man is trapped by matter, energy, space, and time. Scientology calls this MEST. Okay, MEST, MEST. Matter, energy, space, and time. We're trapped by these things. And so Scientology gets a lot of their theology from Buddhism and Hinduism, believe it or not. You'll see that as we go here because they believe in reincarnation. Salvation for a Scientologist comes through a process called auditing. We're going to talk about this in a couple minutes, where through auditor questions, the auditor will guide them through these questions and conversation to consciously re-experience painful or traumatic events in their past in order to free themselves of the limiting effects of these events. Okay, so this is how they get cleared of these engrams. Again, engrams being these snapshots from previous events of the reactive mind. But here's the thing. Then you tie into this whole auditing process, the concept of reincarnation, because these engrams don't necessarily have to be from this life. They can be engrams or memories from previous lives. All right. And so the goal is from these auditing sessions to clear a person of all of these engrams, these limiting factors, these memories that screw up your analytical, clear thinking. Okay. Each one of these sessions to go in and speak to an auditor, it's a fee for service basis. They call it a donation. It's a lot more than a donation. They call it a fixed donation. And with each audit, there is higher and higher costs associated. So when you start out, it's fairly cheap. It's no big deal. In fact, I think they give you the first one or two of them for free. Okay. But with each successive time you go in to get another level of clear, it costs you more and more and more. And that is why this faith has become, oh my goodness, it has been a cash cow. It can cost people hundreds of thousands of dollars to get a state of clear from Scientology. Okay. It makes sense now why this is a celebrity religion, because you got to have some dough. You got to have some money to pull this off. And just like typical cults, they'll talk people into mortgaging their house. Selling off whatever inheritance they have, whatever savings they have, they'll cash in just to reach this state of clear. And I mentioned here that mankind is trapped by space, energy, matter, and time. MEST. Okay. Matter, energy, space, and time. I said it out of order. I got to get it consistent here. But if you reach a state of clear, you will gain superpowers because you will have escaped matter, energy, space, and time, MEST. Okay? And Hubbard claims that you will you will develop certain almost superpowers, X-Men powers over the world around you because you will have escaped it. Now, really quick, I want to talk about this Electro Psychometer. this e-meter that they use during these auditing sessions. In the early days, it really resembled almost like a lie detector test. Okay, you had this box that kind of measured electrical activity, and then you would have to hold these little cans, and they're kind of like the little V8 cans that you can get at the store, the little ones. And then they have a wire going back, and resistance then is measured between the cans, I guess. A small current is passed through them, and then there's resistance is measured through these cans. And so then the auditor will ask you questions, and as he's asking questions, he's looking for the needle to move on his e-meter, and so the needle moves, some kind of electrical resistance in your body, and therefore he has touched on some kind of an engram. Okay. Then he'll start probing and asking more questions around this, whatever he found, whatever thing he was asking about. It almost has an air of scientific nature to it. It almost sounds like there's something there to it, but really, no. I'm sorry, but no. In fact, it's kind of, I guess, a little bit humorous. At one point, the FDA raided some offices and confiscated all their e-meters because Scientology was claiming they were medical devices. And now they have to refer to them, oh boy, don't quote me on this, but something along the lines of a religious device. They're not allowed to call them a medical device anymore. In fact, they are in fact, Scientology claims that they are purely religious artifacts now. And so you go in, you sit down, the auditor asks you all these questions, and every time he sees that needle move, that means he's got to keep probing and asking questions because he's discovered some engrams, and he will keep questioning and probing and asking until he receives no reading on his e-meter. At that point, it is assumed that you have been cleared of that particular engram. Okay? Because you're no longer responding. You're no longer showing some kind of electrical resistance through these little tin cans that you're being forced to hold. They call this process the bridge to total freedom. And again, it is the quest to becoming clear. Once you become clear, all kinds of amazing things happen. L. Ron Hubbard borrowed many of his beliefs from Hinduism. So there's this concept of reincarnation. And so you could have previous life engrams that are getting in your way as well. All right. L. Ron Hubbard was known for writing science fiction. Many of these space opera stories were stories that were either borrowed from his own books, names and places changed, but concepts the same, or are elements, various struggles and things from L. Ron Hubbard's own life. What is a thetan? A thetan is basically, and I think I went over this a little bit in part 1, but I just want to recap a couple things here. This thetan, I guess, as far as Christianity is concerned, the closest thing to a thetan would be what Christians would call a soul. Okay, it's the true identity of a person. This thetan is intrinsically good. Get this, it's omniscient. Okay, so every person's got a thetan that is omniscient inside of them. This thetan is basically divinity. It's divine, but has forgotten its divinity. See, these thetans were actually the ones that brought the material universe into being, mainly just for their own pleasure. Okay? The universe had no real independent reality. It got its form, its reality from the thetans, this collective of thetans, almost like what you get in Hinduism, where you have each person has a spark of divine in them, and they seek to through yoga and through meditation and through mantras and through offering sacrifices to various Hindu gods, and many other things. They're trying to get back to that knowledge of divinity, okay? You see that in the New Age too. The divine in me blesses the divine in you. Namaste. You know what I mean? And you're trying to get back to that divinity that you once had. I mean, can you imagine that? A God that somehow forgot that it's a God. That is no God. I'm sorry, that's not a God. But these Thetans, they're trying to get back to that state of being God. And that's where going clear comes in, where you're trying to ascend the bridge. You're trying to clear all of these engrams off you so that you can become an operating Thetan, where you can, at this point, you can transcend MEST. Remember MEST? Matter, energy, space, and time. MEST. You're going to transcend that, and you're going to gain special powers when you have gone clear. Supposedly, many people have gone clear. As of yet, I have, and the world in general has not seen anybody come out of Scientology with special X-Men powers to transcend MEST, matter, energy, space, and time. Of all the people that have spent tens of thousands of dollars, why aren't there many people out there that say, yep, I am an operating Thetan. I have been completely cleared and I've got powers. I can levitate. I can move things with my mind. I can travel through space at the speed of light. I can astral travel at will. I mean, I can do all of these cool things. I've got X-Men powers. I can read your mind. I mean, you know what I'm saying? But that doesn't happen. You know, we should see a little Avengers team coming out of Scientology, but it's not happening because it's not real, because it's science fiction. And so these Thetans then, they forgot that they're divine. So whatever the case, they agreed that the universe exists, right? They created the universe for their own pleasure. They agree that it exists. And then somewhere along the way, these Thetans got so into their creation, because, hey, the creation is awesome, but God created it, not Thetans. But they got so into their creation that somewhere along the line over, who knows, a long period of time, they just forgot the fact that they're divine and started putting more and more stock into the fact that they are part of this creation. And so now Scientology comes along as a savior to help everybody establish that link with their divinity and become clear operating Thetans. So moving on, what do Scientologists believe about the cross? This is really interesting. Scientology says that horizontal bar of the cross, see, Scientology has their own version of the cross. You guys probably have seen it. It's, okay, you just imagine the cross of Christianity, and then there's like an X that is superimposed over the top of the cross, right there at the focal point of where the vertical and horizontal beams of the cross meet. There's like this X, but it's more than an X. It's like a star that's in the shape of an X. Okay? So, anyway, so they have their own version of the cross. The horizontal bar represents the material universe, and the vertical bar represents the spirit. And so the spirit is seen to be rising triumphantly, ultimately transcending the turmoil of the physical universe to achieve salvation. And I guess while I'm talking about the Scientology cross, Scientology also has a logo that you might have seen. Again, it looks so science fiction when you see this thing. It is like the letter S, which of course I'm sure it stands for Scientology. And then there are these two triangles that are kind of a little bit diagonal leaning to the left, that are superimposed on top of the S. The top triangle is referred to as the KRC triangle. KRC, each of those letters representing what? K for knowledge, R for responsibility, C for control, and then there is this lower triangle called the arc triangle, which stands for affinity, reality, and communication. You know, another interesting thing about Scientology that's worth mentioning is their abusive tactics. It's no secret, you know, there was an episode on Scientology, I believe, South Park. There's been lots of exposés on Scientology. Scientology is known for its brainwashing tactics. For example, there's been many instances of people out on one of their Sea Org ships who have been labeled a suppressive person, you know, somebody who is starting to question the beliefs of Scientology and the types of punishments that they'll put these guys under. Or, you know, if you're just caught doing something that is against the rules of the Sea Org, and next thing you know, you're in solitary confinement, they'll lock you up, they'll put you in a dark room by yourself for weeks on end, they'll try to starve you. I mean, really strange and abusive things that they will do to people. Another interesting thing about Scientology, as touching Christianity, they deny the existence of hell, categorically denying the existence of God of the Bible, heaven and hell. L. Ron Hubbard was very much opposed to Christianity. If anything, he gravitated towards the occult. Like I mentioned in the first podcast, good friends with Jack Parsons, ended up stealing Jack Parsons' girlfriend. Also a contemporary of Aleister Crowley, and had some interesting connections with Aleister Crowley as well. As far as Jesus goes, Jesus was simply a good teacher. Element of implants that I talked about yesterday, you know, where all of these thetans were gathered up and implanted with fake memories. Okay, their memories were wiped clean and they're implanted with fake memories. They're kind of herded into these almost like movie theaters, and they get brainwashed, and all of their memories are erased and replaced with new ones. And the concept of Christianity was part of the brainwashing. So now Jesus is somewhat of a byproduct of a brainwashing operation done by Xenu. Okay, God, Scientology believes that there are multiple gods, and that some gods are above other gods. It's kind of interesting. You know, L. Ron Hubbard was strange like that. He mentions in several of his writings that there are other gods. He really, as far as I know, doesn't really get in depth on who these gods are at all. It's just one of those things he kind of mentions in passing, but he really never spends a lot of time on finding out who's in charge, if anybody. But yeah, L. Ron Hubbard was polytheistic in his beliefs. As far as sin goes, Scientology believes that mankind is inherently good. Okay, so much for total depravity. No, mankind is born good, and they're pretty much good their whole life. They just make bad decisions from time to time. They also, L. Ron Hubbard, absolutely despised Christians and well, just simply the scriptures telling him that he is a sinner that needs to repent.